The price of betrayal, how a family's trust was shattered. It was supposed to be the best birthday of my life. I turned 16 that year, and my Aunt Claire, who had never really been involved in my life, insisted on hosting the celebration. I had always thought of her as a distant relative, someone who showed up at family events but never really took much interest in me. So when she said she wanted to make my 16th special, I was touched. After all, it felt good to finally feel seen, especially by someone who had never been part of my inner circle. The party was set at her house, a sprawling place that I'd only ever visited a handful of times. It felt strange, like I was walking into someone else's home, even though it was supposed to be for me. But there she was, Claire, buzzing with excitement, telling me how important this birthday was going to be. She had gone all out with the decorations, streamers, balloons, and banners everywhere. Everything had to be perfect, she insisted, as if perfection was the only acceptable outcome. It was all a bit much, but I smiled and let her do her thing. I remember thinking maybe this is just her way of making up for the years of distance. She never really seemed to care about my birthdays before, but now she was practically obsessed with making sure everything was just right. At the time, I didn't question it. I was thrilled to be the center of attention for once. The gift opening was, well, normal, I guess. My parents gave me a new gaming console, something I'd wanted for months. My uncle handed me a sleek watch, and there were gift cards, clothes, and even some expensive headphones that I had been eyeing for ages. But it was Aunt Claire who made sure everything was documented. Every gift was meticulously photographed, and she jotted down notes on who gave what. At first, I thought she was just being thorough, maybe for thank you cards or something. But then there were moments that didn't sit right. During dinner, Claire kept disappearing upstairs. She'd slip away for a few minutes, and each time she came back, she looked more and more agitated. Her face, usually so composed, was flushed, her eyes darting around the room as if she was looking for something or someone. She barely touched her food, which was strange because she usually loved showing off her cooking. My cousin Alex gave me a strange look across the table as if she felt the shift in the air too. I tried to ignore it, but there was this growing feeling, like a weight pressing down on me, that something wasn't quite right. The night was supposed to be fun. It should have been perfect. But deep down, I couldn't shake the nagging thought that something was about to go terribly wrong. And then it happened. Aunt Claire burst into the living room, her face red, her hands trembling as she scanned the room. She barely looked at anyone before she blurted it out. "My jewelry is missing," she cried, her voice shaky but theatrical, a drama queen in her finest hour. It felt like the air left the room all at once. "My diamond tennis bracelet," she continued, her voice rising, "and my mother's sapphire ring. They're gone." The room went silent. My stomach dropped, not because I had anything to do with it, but because I knew exactly where this was heading. Aunt Claire's eyes fixed on me, and I felt a cold sweat run down my back. Luca was the only one who went upstairs today. Her words felt like ice. I tried to say something to defend myself, but she cut me off before I could explain. "Don't lie to me," she hissed. "I saw you sneaking up earlier." It was as if the floor had vanished beneath me. The world spun, and all I could do was watch as my family, who had once been my support, turned their eyes to me, their expressions shifting into disbelief and suspicion. She had a photo on her phone, one that she insisted was proof of my guilt. A blurry image that, in the heat of the moment, looked damning. It was from when I helped her set up decorations the day before, but she twisted it to make it seem like I was sneaking around, hiding something. I tried to explain, to tell them the truth, but no one was listening. Not even my parents. My mom, Sophie, who had always stood by me, now looked at me with doubt in her eyes. My dad, Austin, who had always been my protector, asked me, in a voice full of disappointment, to just tell the truth. And then Aunt Claire's voice sliced through the silence like a knife. She wouldn't feel comfortable until every gift I'd received was returned. "Just in case," she said, her voice dripping with suspicion, "you plan to sell them to make up for not being able to sell the jewelry." I was speechless. Watching my gifts, my birthday presents, being handed back one by one felt like watching my life unravel in slow motion. The gaming console, the headphones, the watch. Gone. My parents, looking defeated, didn't even protest. They agreed with Claire, their trust in me shattered. And in that moment, I realized that my family, my own flesh and blood, no longer saw me as their son. I was just the thief they were convinced me to be. The party ended not with laughter and joy, but with tears and empty hands. The room, still thick with the lingering remnants of confusion, suddenly felt smaller. Aunt Claire's accusation hung in the air, suffocating any remaining shred of joy from the evening. My heart raced as she waved her phone in front of everyone, the reflection of my face in the hallway mirror glaring back at me like an indictment. "I saw him," she said, her voice shaking but unwavering. "Sneaking up the stairs, acting all suspicious." It was like something out of a bad crime drama, except this time it wasn't a fictional character. It was me. Me, standing in the middle of my own birthday party, trying to process the nightmare that was unfolding before my eyes. I wasn't even upstairs today, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But the more I spoke, the more distant my family's eyes grew. Aunt Claire's relentless gaze bore into me like a wolf circling its prey. You're lying, she snapped, cutting me off with an authority I'd never seen in her before. Her voice was firm, each word dripping with suspicion. I know what I saw. And I know what I didn't see. You've betrayed me. All these years of trust, and this is how you repay me. The weight of those words hit me like a punch to the stomach. Betrayal. Was she serious? Betrayal? Me? I hadn't done anything wrong. But the damage was done. In the blink of an eye, the room erupted into chaos. Whispers ricocheted off the walls, each conversation louder than the last. My cousins exchanged knowing glances. My parents stood frozen, their faces unreadable. My mother, Sophie, who had always been my greatest supporter, seemed to shrink under the pressure of the moment. Ethan, she began, her voice strained, as though she were trying to find the right words but couldn't. Just tell the truth. Please. And then it happened. Aunt Claire, tears now brimming in her eyes, stood tall and in the most dramatic voice she could muster, announced, I won't feel comfortable until every gift he's received is returned. Who knows what else he's hiding? I froze. Every gift. Every single one. My heart sank as I watched the people I'd once called family start to walk over, their hands outstretched, ready to take back the presents they had given me. The gaming console, gone. The headphones, gone. The sleek watch from my uncle, the one I'd been dreaming of, gone. But the worst part wasn't the gifts. It wasn't even the gifts being taken away. It was the look in their eyes. The look of doubt. The look that said they were no longer sure of me. My own mother, my father, they stood there, silent, defeated. They handed the gifts back one by one like they were doing the right thing. My cousin, Alex, tried to speak up. This doesn't make sense, Aunt Claire. Why would Ethan steal from you? But Aunt Claire shot her down with a sharp, you don't understand. You're too young. And just like that, Alex was silenced. I couldn't breathe. It felt like I was suffocating in front of everyone, like the walls were closing in. The worst part? The feeling of helplessness. I was innocent, but I had no way of proving it. No one cared to listen. Before I share what happened next, the moment that left an entire room of journalists in stunned silence, I want to connect with you, my amazing viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever had to fight for something you believe in, hit that like button because this story is just getting started. As I stood there watching my birthday unravel before me, and Claire's final words hit like a hammer. You've lost my trust, Ethan. You'll never get it back. The party ended in the most unexpected way. The laughter, the music, the celebration, gone. Replaced with silence and a sense of deep, crushing betrayal. The gifts were gone. The family was gone. And I was left standing there, alone, with nothing but the empty space where my trust used to be. The weeks that followed were a blur of exclusion. Each passing day felt heavier than the last, the weight of my family's rejection pressing down on me like a constant reminder of everything I had lost. The invitations to family gatherings stopped coming. No phone calls, no messages, nothing. My phone remained silent, just like the empty space at the dinner table where I used to belong. I had never realized how fragile my connection with them was until it all vanished in an instant. The warmth that once filled my home now felt distant, as if I was the stranger they had all been trying to forget. Aunt Claire's voice still echoed in my head, calling me a thief, a traitor. And though she had tried to paint me as the family outcast, it wasn't just her I had to face. It was the collective silence of everyone who had once been my support. But I couldn't let myself drown in the sadness. I couldn't afford to. I threw myself into work. I picked up a part-time job at a local tech store, working nights and weekends. It wasn't much, but it gave me something to focus on, something to keep my mind from drifting back to that terrible night. Slowly, I started saving every penny I earned. The money wasn't important at first. What mattered was the discipline, the routine. I was determined to prove that I didn't need anyone else to define my future, not even my family. My schoolwork became my refuge. I spent every free moment studying, focusing on my grades, pushing myself to excel. I'd always been a decent student, but now school was my escape. It wasn't just about getting good grades, it was about building something for myself, a life that was entirely my own. The more I worked, the more I realized how much I had to give, how much I could accomplish without relying on anyone else. It wasn't easy, but with every project I completed, with every class I aced, my resolve grew stronger. I learned quickly that there was no room for weakness. I couldn't afford to be distracted by the ghosts of my past. My family had turned their backs on me, but I wasn't going to let that define who I became. Slowly, I started to recognize the value of self-reliance. It wasn't just about surviving, it was about thriving. I set goals, realistic ones that would move me forward, and I stuck to them. Every little victory fueled my determination to never let anyone or anything hold me back again. But Aunt Claire's narrative was far from over. Even though I was no longer part of their world, I could hear whispers. My absence at family events was always noticed. She made sure of that. She continued to paint me as the person who had walked away, the one who didn't care about his family. I wasn't invited to Thanksgiving, and when Christmas came around, the excuses were the same. It's just easier if you stay home, Ethan. The message was clear. They were doing me a favor, protecting me from the discomfort of facing the family after everything that had happened. I began to feel the sting of isolation again, but this time I didn't let it consume me. I kept my head down, my focus sharp. It wasn't just the holidays. Even when the family came together for simple gatherings, I was left out. Birthdays, anniversaries, even graduations. No invites. No calls. Just silence, like I had never existed in their lives. My cousin, Alex, still tried to reach out, sending me texts and photos, keeping me in the loop. But every message from her only made me feel more disconnected. She would tell me how Aunt Claire was always quick to remind everyone how I had chosen to distance myself from the family, twisting the truth in ways that made me the villain in my own story. But I didn't let it break me. Instead, I channeled all my energy into my work and my studies. I learned how to be independent in ways I never had before. I set up a savings account, opened an investment portfolio, and started planning for the future. By the time I graduated high school, I had a solid foundation. I was no longer the kid who needed anyone's approval. I had become someone who didn't just survive, someone who thrived. I knew what I wanted, and I wasn't going to let anyone's opinion or my past hold me back. The turning point came when I landed a part-time internship at a tech company after graduation. It wasn't a big deal at first, but it was a sign that I was heading in the right direction. Each step I took felt like a quiet rebellion against the life I had been given, against the family who had tried to break me. But now, with every accomplishment, I was building something far more important than a career. I was building my independence. My world had changed, but one thing was certain: I wasn't going to let Aunt Claire or anyone else define my future. This wasn't just about proving her wrong, it was about proving to myself that I could rise above it all. I wasn't just the kid they abandoned. I was becoming someone they would have to reckon with. And no matter how hard Aunt Claire tried to keep her narrative alive, I knew one thing for sure: I was no longer the person she thought I was. I had become so much more. It was strange, standing there at Aunt Claire's front door, knowing that this was the moment I had been preparing for. Years of distance, years of resentment, and now it was all about to come to a head. The past, which had been a heavy weight on my shoulders for so long, was about to be confronted. I had worked hard to get to where I was, to become the person who no longer needed validation from anyone, especially not from her. When I received the call, I almost didn't believe it. Aunt Claire, the woman who had made me the villain in our family story, was in trouble. Her financial situation had collapsed after a disastrous investment. She had lost everything: her retirement savings, her home, everything she had worked for. And now she was asking me for help. I wasn't sure what had changed, but the desperation in her voice was unmistakable. She needed money, and I was the only person who might be able to help. But this wasn't going to be a simple transaction. This wasn't going to be about charity or pity. This was my moment, the moment where everything would come full circle. I wasn't just going to write a check and walk away. I had spent too long building myself up, learning to stand on my own 2 feet, to let this woman off the hook for what she had done. I arrived at her house, dressed in a crisp suit, the type of clothes I would never have worn as a teenager. The old Claire, the one who had once been able to manipulate the family into believing I was a criminal, would have never expected me to show up like this, confident, composed, and in control. Aunt Claire was sitting on the couch when I walked in, her face pale, her hands trembling. Gone was the commanding presence she had once carried. She looked small, vulnerable, as if the weight of her mistakes had finally caught up with her. Her makeup, once perfect, was smudged. She looked like a woman on the verge of collapse. I sat across from her, setting my leather portfolio on the coffee table between us. "Ethan, thank you for coming," she said, her voice wavering. "I know things haven't been good between us, but I really need help. I've made some mistakes and now, I don't know what to do. I could see the guilt in her eyes, the desperation. She was trying to play the victim, trying to reclaim some sense of dignity. But I wasn't fooled. Not anymore. Claire, I said, my voice calm, controlled. I'll help you, but there are conditions. Her eyes flickered with both relief and wariness. Anything? She replied quickly, her hands clutching a tissue like it was the only thing holding her together. I didn't waste any time. I reached into my portfolio and pulled out a stack of papers. One by one, I placed them on the table. First, I said, my tone unwavering, I want you to acknowledge what you did to me when I was 16. You falsely accused me of stealing, humiliated me in front of the entire family, and you destroyed my reputation without a second thought. You need to own up to that, Claire. Not just to me, but to everyone who was there. She opened her mouth to speak, but I held up my hand, silencing her. I'm not finished. Second, you will seek financial counseling. I'll pay for it, but you have to go. You need to learn how to manage your finances without depending on others to bail you out. And third, I paused, looking around the room at the few family members who had gathered, standing by, waiting for me to say my piece. Everyone here needs to understand something. I continued, meeting their eyes, one by one. This is it. This is the last time I'm stepping in. I'm not your backup plan or your emergency fund. I've worked too hard to get where I am, and I'm not about to let you drag me back into your mess. The silence that followed was thick with tension. The room felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for Aunt Claire to say something, anything, to break the silence. But all she did was look down at the check I had placed in front of her. It was a significant amount, enough to cover her debts and her mortgage for the next few months, but it came with strings attached. She could feel it. Don't look at me like that, I said, my voice firm. This isn't about forgiveness. This is about accountability. You owe me and the rest of the family an apology. I reached into my bag and pulled out another document, one that had been sitting in my desk for years. The list, a record of everything I had lost that night. The gifts, the humiliation, the betrayal. I handed it to my parents, who had stood silently by during this whole exchange. You remember these, don't you? I asked, not waiting for a response. The birthday gifts you all made me return because of her lies? With interest calculated over the years, this is what I'm owed. The number on the paper was staggering. It wasn't just about the physical gifts, it was about the emotional cost, the years of pain. I wasn't asking for sympathy. I was demanding justice. I turned back to Aunt Claire, who was now looking up at me, her face drained of color. You wanted to make me pay for something I didn't do. You wanted to destroy me. But look where we are now, Claire. You're the one who's lost everything. The finality in my voice was unmistakable. She couldn't deny it anymore. I've kept detailed records of everything, Claire. Because unlike you, I don't forget. I keep track of what I'm owed, and what I've earned. As I walked toward the door, I heard her call out, her voice small, almost pleading. Ethan, I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. Think about it, Claire. If you had just been kind, if you had just trusted me, I would have helped you without any conditions. But you didn't, did you? With that, I stepped out into the cool night air, the weight of the past finally lifting from my shoulders. As I walked to my car, I couldn't help but smile. The truth had finally been told, and in that moment, I knew I had done the right thing. The family could try to rewrite the story. They could try to pretend like none of this had ever happened. But I knew the truth. And no matter what they said, no matter how hard Aunt Claire tried to spin her lies, they could never take away what I had built for myself. As I drove away, I felt something I hadn't in years, peace. The past was finally behind me,